Good afternoon, college students. Okay, so I have a Zoom lecture for you today. Okay, this is going to be mostly on the French and Indian War, but it's going to have some other stuff too. So I am recording this session, so just bear that in mind. I'm recording this so you can comment on it later. I like those comments on the lectures, I like the questions you ask. Sometimes you challenge me immensely. Okay, so let me get started right away just so I can get it done and not keep you too long. I don't think this will be too long a one. Okay. Any questions for me before I get about anything, kids? Okay, let me get started here. And actually, let me enable the chat just in case you do have a question. Okay, good. So that'll be there. And this is here. I'll move this over a little bit too. Okay, so I've titled this The Duel for North America, okay? And it's actually chapter 4 for us, okay? So the Duel for North America, sometimes I've titled it Wars for Empire, stuff like that. But what we want to focus on in this lecture is we're getting into the revolutionary unit, right? And there were some things we mentioned yesterday that might be providing seeds of independence, seeds of democracy, whether it's the Great Awakening, appealing to more of an individual relationship with one's faith or one's God, or the Enlightenment, of course, focusing on natural rights, okay? The Quakers being egalitarian type people, and then the colony of Philadelphia, which is going to be the birthplace of the Constitution, right? So you see kind of these seeds of independence developing, even though, I mean, it's like they're there, right? But they're not going to germinate yet because, make no mistake, the colonists still very much consider themselves to be British, right? So it's not like, let's get the heck out of here. They're very British at this point, but there's seeds there. There's things, so to speak, under the surface. Okay, now, first of all, kids, you've been lied to by several textbooks throughout your academic career, right? I mean, almost every textbook you encounter says World War I, World War II. Well, guess what? That's a lie, right? Because there's been more world wars than World War I and World War II. Okay, all of these conflicts here can be labeled by several textbooks as world wars, okay, at least collegiate ones. And all of these typically involved France and England and often Spain in the middle. And the reason why they're called world wars is because they involve multiple continents. Okay, now your textbook does talk a little bit about each of these wars. I'm not going to go into detail each of these wars. That would be a forever lecture. Okay, so hopefully you read some of that the other night when you're working on the questions. Obviously, we're going to focus on the French and Indian War. If you look at these conflicts and you throw in the American Revolution and the French Revolution, as well as the Napoleonic Wars, you end up with about 9 world conflicts. So just keep that in perspective, okay? And once again, the primary countries are focusing upon here are England, France, and Spain, okay? So we're going to focus on the French. Now, we didn't do a lot with French exploration, so as part of this lecture, I like to mention some French explorers and kind of give you some background because that helps you understand the conflict better. So let me kind of cover some French exploration with you. Okay. Now this map is pretty good in showing who owns what or who is claiming what in North America. Okay. And if you'll notice here, the blue is France. So France actually has the biggest land claims in North America up to 1750. Huge expanse of territory. England, who we tend to focus on very much because that's who we rebelled against and formed our nation, they of course have the eastern seaboard, right? Those 13 colonies. And then of course Spain, with their conquest of much of Central America, had come up into parts of North America, okay? And of course they had the colony of Florida here, okay? So just kind of a little bit of geography there, kind of show you what's going on and what they're competing for, what they're laying claim to. Now, the first French explorer to mention is Jacques Cartier, okay? Some Cartier maybe. Cartier explored the east coast of Canada in the 1530s, and you see his 2 voyages here, okay? But he's going to sail up the St. Lawrence River into what is now Montreal, and you see that with the red voyage. So he's going to sail the way up to St. Lawrence. Here's Quebec City, right? And then what will become Montreal is down here. So he's laying claim to some major parts of what will be Canada, right? Once again, this is an overview. You could detail all these voyages much more than what I'm doing, okay? Quebec, right, is going to be established in 1608. Here's kind of an early artist rendering of that. It will become the capital of what is New France. You already know that the French specialize in the fur trade, and they seem to be a little bit different than the English. And keep this in mind, they're a little bit different than the English in terms of conquest or maybe settlement, in that there's not as many people. The English are going to outnumber them in terms of the number of English coming over. And that's a key point that I'll come back to in a moment. They're going to establish an alliance with the Huron tribe. Huron, pretty close to us, right? Native American tribe, okay? Some connections there, I suppose. Samuel de Champlain is the person who established all this. I don't know if I mentioned him a couple minutes ago, but he's considered by many to be the father of New France. So just very brief history of French settlement in the so-called New World going on here. Another person to mention, and once again, slow me down if you need to. Another person to mention is Robert de La Salle. Robert de La Salle is going to explore the entire length of Mississippi. And I can only imagine how beautiful that was, you know, pre-development and settlement. And I'm sure there were some Native American communities along the way, but, you know, hotels on the river and all that stuff. I imagine it was very pristine and beautiful. And he actually did that. If you watch this green line, he actually went through the Great Lakes to do it. And went down the Mississippi all the way down to what will become New Orleans. And I believe this is one of his voyages too. St. Louis, Fort St. Louis down here. But this is the voyage I'm highlighting, his voyage down the Mississippi. And he's going to claim the entire length of the Mississippi, and he's going to name the region he explored Louisiana, right? A key piece of territory in our nation's history, which I'm sure you're at least somewhat aware of. Another explorer to mention is Antoine Cadillac. That's right, kids, Cadillac. Maybe your grandparents drive one. Here he is, right? Cadillac. He's not lying to you. He's going to found Fort Detroit in 1701, Motor City, right? This is early Detroit in 1701. Cadillac was a soldier, a fur trader who expanded trade in the region. You see his explorations here. He actually set out from Montreal. And this, of course, down here is what will become Detroit, or Detroit. Okay? I'm sure many of you speak much better French than I do. Okay? So Antoine Cadillac. Okay, so just a few explorers to mention there, moving rapidly. Here's the deal. So the French are laying claim to all this territory, right? But they don't have the population. In 1700, there's about, give or take, 15,000 people of French descent in North America. English, 250,000. Okay. 1750, French, 60,000. English, 1,170,000. So England is quite surpassing the French in terms of people inhabiting the continent. And the English colonies are increasingly diverse. I mean, there's always been a diversity to what will become the United States of America, right? There's always been a diversity to America, and we see that here. English Welsh, 52%, African, forced migration, right, 20%, German, 7%, The Germans will become the largest immigrant group to come to the United States over time. Scots-Irish, 7%, Irish, 5%, Scottish, 4%, Dutch, 3%, and then other Europeans, too. So quite a diversity. And New York, you may remember reading about that. New York is a very diverse colony. A lot of that diversity and is settling there, and New York has remained an incredibly diverse part of the country. Okay. And of course, they'll migrate out from there to other places. Okay, so French and Indian War. French and Indian War, simply defined, go back to your junior high definition here, right? French and Indian allies versus British and Indian allies. Some Native American tribes will ally with the French, others will ally with the British, believing that their alliance to one or the other will make things better for them with the outcome. They'll have some power at the end of it and some control of their destiny. Now, if you notice the years here, the French-Indian War begins in 1754 through 1763. Sometimes there's some confusion because the Europeans call it the 7 Years' War, right? Basically, this is a world war, right? Basically, the fighting in Europe began in 1756. A peace treaty ended that war in 1763. Okay, so that's the discrepancy in years there that you sometimes get with the name of this conflict. But notice multi-continents, multi-empires, right? And so they often they being historians often classify this as a world conflict. Okay. Okay. All right. So first battle of the war will take place at Fort Duquesne. Fort Duquesne is near what will become Pittsburgh. It's at the point where the three rivers of Pittsburgh intersect. Those three rivers are the Allegheny, the Monongahela, and the Ohio. Okay. The conflicting conflicts are in the Ohio Valley. Now, the Ohio Valley, kids, I'm sure you know, is not just Ohio. The Ohio Valley concerns the future states of Ohio, Indiana, West Virginia, Kentucky, Tennessee, and what was then the colony of Pennsylvania. So the Ohio Valley, okay, is a very large swath of territory. I'm going to repeat that one more time. Ohio, Indiana, West Virginia, Kentucky, Tennessee, and Pennsylvania. So that's all considered to be a part of the Ohio Valley. And what's going on here is you've got several groups competing for territorial claims, in some of it in the Three Rivers area, but also some of it beyond into that Ohio Valley. Colonists, French, and Iroquois all had competing claims to this region. Okay, and you can kind of see where everything intersects here. Okay, in this region here. Actually, I think that's Fort Duquesne in there. Okay. All right. Okay. The first battle, you know, sometimes it's said that the man who started the French-Indian War is George Washington, who's going to lose. He's going to surrender in that first battle, but he kind of starts it. Now, a little bit of the background here. Now, notice the date, interesting date, right? He's going to be forced to surrender on July 4th, 1754. George Washington, a colonial elite, but nevertheless a member of the English Empire, right? Owns large tracts of land in the Ohio Valley. And to quote a former professor, you don't mess with George Washington's stuff, right? So he has a claim to 500,000 acres in the Ohio Valley. So he's sent there to survey some of what will become his family's land. He gets there and he fires upon a small detachment of French troops. Okay, and these French troops, so some of them die. I remember reading a description of Washington had some Native American scouts with him, and they scalped some of the French soldiers while they were still alive. And so it was brutal conflict. I mean, brutal but brief, not a large conflict. Okay, and he attempts to build a very quick fort, and that's Fort Necessity, which you may have seen on that map. Now, the French return. They're angry, they return, and they defeat Washington. Okay, a few weeks later, basically. 1755, the British attack again under General Edward Braddock. Now, Edward Braddock is a pretty prominent general at this point, significant figure. He's going to be defeated and killed at the Battle of Fort Duquesne now. Okay, the French will wreck Fort Duquesne after removing Washington from Fort Necessity. Okay, And that's in, let's see, when is that? July 55. That Braddock is killed and defeated. And I believe that's a young George Washington with him here, according to this artist depiction of the event. Okay. So early on, things aren't going great for the British. It's going to change. Okay. Fortunes change for the British as the war continues. The English Navy is pretty formidable, of course. And what we see is basically a steady progression of the English taking territory away from the French, using the waterways of North America, but also sending up British troops and colonial militias from the colonies. Okay. So French fell at Louisbourg in 1758. I know this is trying to correct me here, but this is actually how you spell it. Louisbourg's up here. So we see a British fleet come up from Nova Scotia, defeat Louisbourg, and we see here's 1759. So you see, your text describes battles almost seasonal, right? Like you would battle all summer, and then winter you'd stop, and just. And if you go back to those wars in the beginning, it was just almost constant warfare going on in these years, right? Late 1600s, really through the 1700s. Okay, just pretty regular warfare for these empires. Okay, but you can see the British advance here, and then once again you can see the British advance of foot soldiers, but also colonial militias are being enlisted to fight as well and defend their territory. And what are the colonies interested in? The colonies are interested in expansion, right? And this is actually a really good map. Here we see Fort Necessity. There we see Fort Duquesne. There's Fort Niagara here. There was a battle there. Montreal. Okay, this is a pretty good map here. Okay, but we see the steady advance of British troops, and so that they regained control of the St. Lawrence River, or they gained control of the St. Lawrence River eventually. A little bit more to this. Quebec fell in 1759, following an attack led by James Wolfe. James Wolfe is another figure that's commonly mentioned in the French-Indian War. He's a British officer, was very young. He's 32. He's innovative, natural-born leader. Right? He's kind of mentioned as one of the heroes of this conflict, so I threw his name down there. Montreal will fall in 1760. Let's see. We can. So once again, there's Louisbourg. There you see Wolfe's name. British advances. There's Montreal. Where's Quebec? Is Quebec in here? It's in here somewhere, isn't it? Oh, it's up here. I passed it. Quebec first, and then Montreal. Sorry about that. Okay, but once again, you see some battles going on down here as well. And here you see, I just want to keep mentioning troops coming from the colonies because that's kind of significant to what we're talking about. Okay, let's see. Anything else I want to mention about that? No, I don't believe so. Okay, all right. So for all intents and purposes, what is the significance of this? That is an incredibly watered down history of the French-Indian War, right? Okay, so that's just like, whoo, boom, here's what happened. Okay, but what's significant for us in this revolutionary period? What's going on? Well, the first thing we see is the key reason why the French are going to lose this conflict is the fact that they're outnumbered in North America, right? I mean, obviously population helps win conflicts. There's more people who can serve, more people who can supply, and all those things. So this demonstrates that significance. Colonies were able to somewhat unify against the common foe. Now, I want to stress again. So there's an interesting. I don't know if contrast is the right word here, but there's a situation here where colonial subjects are definitely British Empire, right? And you can imagine during this conflict, there's a lot of patriotism going on. They're fighting against the French. But there are things, once again, I call them seeds, being put in place that are going to cause independence. And one of those is the fact that they're able to unify somewhat. And Benjamin Franklin actually proposed an attempt at unification during this time period called the Albany Congress, Albany, New York. This was an attempt at home rule, which was rejected. Now, what happens is there's a meeting of representatives sent by the legislatures of the northern 7 of the 13 British North American colonies. So it's the northern 7 colonies: Connecticut, Maryland, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, New York, Pennsylvania, and Rhode Island. So those representatives sent, and they meet with 150 Iroquois representatives. So the purpose of this meeting was to enlist the help of the Iroquois, okay, but also form some type of defensive or some type of alliance against the French. They wanted to form a formal colonial alliance, okay, which would have provided for coordinated taxation and militia forces, okay. Now, at the assembly, there's unanimous approval. So all the representatives at the assembly, they're like, let's do this, right? Sounds good. They go back home to their colonies and they meet with their legislatures, what are called provincial legislatures, and the provincial legislatures say, no way, right? They want to maintain their own independent status as a colony, you know, and think about the things going forward that you probably know about. Think about the first Constitution of the United States, the Articles of Confederation, which was a loose alliance, right? So there's these colonies want to maintain their independence at this point. But this is an interesting step, this, you know, this first proposal at potential unification, right, that had occurred here, okay? And then, of course, the other thing to mention, and I'm going to spend some time, I want to spend some time looking at the Iroquois tomorrow. Our primary document analysis tomorrow is going to involve the Iroquois, okay? You're going to put you in groups, and each group will look at a different document. The Iroquois played European rivalries against one another. So the Iroquois are showing their astuteness here in trying to play rivalries against one another. There's times they ally with the French, times they ally with the English, you know, making deals, working, forming connections with other tribes, maybe exploiting connections with others, fighting against some other tribes, right? But they're demonstrating their political astuteness as well. Their empire, their power isn't going to last, of course, but okay. So what's important for us is some of the developments that are occurring during it, but then of course the results, okay? So results of this conflict. France lost a majority of its overseas empire, okay? English are gonna win this conflict and the French are gonna lose a vast majority of their empire, okay? If you look at this map here, English is, I don't know, what is it, color tan, right? Following the French-Indian War, this is now English claims in North America, right? I mean, think of the history of Canada now, right? Montreal and Quebec have a lot of French heritage, but, you know, Canada becomes a British Commonwealth, right? So I'm sure you know that history. So England and Spain as a result of the French-Indian War, okay? I'm not seeing a lot of French color in there, are we? Okay, not a good result for them, at least territory-wise. Spain will gain control of Louisiana in 1762. Now, that's going to be somewhat short-lived, right? When Napoleon comes to power, he's going to get that territory and eventually sell that to Thomas Jefferson. I'm sure you know that history or at least heard of it, okay? All of this is coming about through the Treaty of Paris of 1763. This can sometimes be confusing because there's two Treaty of Parises, at least in relatively close proximity in this time period. You've got the one resulting in the French-Indian War, and then there'll be another Treaty of Paris ending the American Revolutionary War. So just got to focus on years with those. So this is 1763. Britain obviously became the dominant power in North America. Sadly for Native Americans, the loss of the French, and maybe, you know, in hindsight, you don't see this, but the loss of the French reduced their ability to play Europeans off against each other, to kind of exploit those rivalries. So once the French are removed, it's difficult to exploit that rivalry. And we're talking about the tribes of the Great Lakes and the Ohio Valley region here, when we talk about those tribes that played European rivalries against each other between the French and the British. Okay, another result. Okay, now, once again, you can imagine coming out of the French-Indian War, victory, right? You know, patriotism pretty high, right? But once again, there's some seeds of tension. So loyal British subjects, but there's some things, you know, there's just some things that are getting on their nerves a little bit, right? The colonial militias had played a key role in the French-Indian War, but they're often looked down upon, right? Oh, you know, those militias, you know, they're not organized and all that stuff. And even though at times they had demonstrated great bravery, and at times British troops were not so brave, okay? And one of the things that the militias are good at is guerrilla warfare. Now, guerrilla warfare is going to be key in this conflict. It's one of the reasons why some of the, like you see battling beyond some of those major battles I mentioned. I mentioned fighting will continue until 1763. A lot of that's guerrilla style fighting, right? Hiding in the woods, stuff like that. Not those formal, you know, aim and fire battles, okay? And the militias are good at that. Now, Sometimes guerrilla warfare is an overblown factor in the American Revolution. Sometimes people really like to stress that. It can be overblown, but it was a factor, and it's a factor here too. Okay. So in 1763, Americans are tremendously patriotic and they're loyal subjects once again, but tension had developed. They didn't like being looked down upon. And I'm going to tell you who didn't really like being looked down upon: George Washington, right? Commanders like George Washington were forced to take secondary roles, right? They were not given, equal officer positions. So they didn't feel like they were being treated, as full British subjects. And that's problematic. Washington is an elite. He's a colonial elite. But the British elites are letting him know that you're still beneath us. And that's not good, because these colonial elites who want to be thought of as elite as any British elite and as included as any British elite, they're going to be the ones leading the revolution, right? So this is, once again, there's that seed there, okay? Okay, one more slide to go. All right, now, and then here's two key issues coming out of it. The rivalry, the being looked down upon, all those things. Those are minor things. But here's two big Revolutionary War causations coming out of the French Indian War, which, if you remember junior high history, you may remember this. So part of the deal was this: the English established a proclamation line. The English are trying to reduce tensions with Native Americans as well, but that's the English in England, right? So they established a proclamation line which prohibited settlement west of the Appalachian Mountains. And if you can see this map here, there's that proclamation line. So basically what the English are saying is, colonists do not expand beyond the Appalachian Mountains. And colonists are basically saying, well, there's a lot of things they could say there, but basically they're saying, sorry, we're going to expand beyond the Appalachian Mountains. So they almost start violating that right away. And they're upset with the fact that England is trying to stop them from expanding beyond the Appalachian Mountains. So that's a source of tension. If you look at the history of colonial settlement, there's been one constant theme, right? Expansion. It's not stopping at the Appalachian Mountains. Okay. And then maybe the key issue, right? Be a large national debt, which the colonies will be expected to help pay for. And you know what? Maybe they should have paid for it. I mean, sometimes, history tends to favor the writer, and the writer of American history likes to really say how bad England was and inflicting those egregious taxes upon the United States. But the British Army had just protected America here, right? And, came out with a pretty favorable treaty towards them, So maybe they should pay for it, because war causes debt. The issue, of course, is going to be taxation without representation, right? That's going to be the issue. Okay? Questions? Hey, look at that. I got done by 2:29. Not bad. Now I'm going to post this. Try and come up with some type of question or comment. I don't know if this lecture is kind of simple. I don't know if this lends itself as much to that as some of the other ones where I'm giving you more gobs of information. But see if you can give me some type of response or ask me some type of question. So I'll post this in the comment space on the classroom page, right? And then just give me a comment or question, and I'll give you 10 points for doing that, okay? Don't forget to do it. That's your assignment for the night. Respond to this lecture. That's it. That's your only assignment for the night. Okay? All right, my college students, if you have no questions of me, have a good day.